Hey everybody, welcome in. Thanks for joining us again for our Who's Next series where we're just breaking down the SEC coaches Alabama is going to face in 2020. And today we continue with Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt. And Tony, I guess the question I want to start off with is, is Tennessee on the cusp of a big turnaround? The number 7 class last year, currently the number 2 class. Are things changing in Knoxville?
It certainly seems like they've got a positive momentum under Pruitt. This year's class is kind of an interesting class because there's a lot of 3 stars in it, but they've been getting a lot of kids in there. He's making some noise. If anything, people are starting to notice Tennessee a little bit more, and that's a win in itself. The East could start to open up more. It seems like Mullen's making a move in Florida, and if Pruitt really kind of gets Tennessee back, you can see a more competitive East. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can ride this wave. I mean, with Tennessee, we've kind of seen them make this trajectory and then, kind of stumble again and fall back down to, being Tennessee again. But if they can come back, I mean, he seems like he has the ability to make them into a powerhouse in the future. I'm not sure about if it's next year, but I think, by the look of it, it kind of seems like they're rising up, and in the next few years, they could challenge for the East.
Yeah, and I am perfectly happy to admit it. Tennessee started gaining all this buzz. I think it was maybe late April or mid-April, just because Tennessee's ranked high, and a lot of it is just because they have all these guys already committed. They have 23 commits now. Back in April, they probably had 17 or 18, and most schools had 8 or 5 or 6. I think Alabama had 2. We see all that and you go, well, Tennessee's just up there because they have guys committed and those guys might not stay or they're 3 stars. But, we've seen that sort of momentum has seemed to work. We've seen 4-star guys like Hudson Wolf, recently, I think he committed last week to Tennessee. So they sort of snowballed that, they did pick up a lot of 3 stars that maybe, schools like Alabama or some of these other places weren't as interested in. But now they're getting, the 4-star prospects that everybody wants. So maybe
and there's some great kids in that class as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just I didn't want to make it seem like it's a bunch of just only 3 stars.
Yeah.
It's just they do have a lot. It's a very quantity based class right now at the moment. There's just so many kids, but there's something to be said about getting those kids to your program as well. They've been doing a great job, and really building a top class. I don't want to make it seem like they're not. I really like the class that they're building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at the other programs. Tennessee has 23 commits right now. Rutgers has 21. Florida has 20. And then a couple others are around 16, 19. We know Alabama doesn't have that many. Alabama's down in the single digits. But I mean, I think Tennessee I think the class actually has staying power now. I think, Tennessee finished 7th last year. And I think that's maybe where this group is going to finish up.
Yeah, and we'll see how let's see what the season brings. I think that might tie into if people really see Tennessee start to, they finished strong last year. If they can kind of continue that this season and people, and recruits start seeing like, hey, maybe Jeremy Pruitt's building something with Tennessee. I think that's how they keep their wave, and I think that could be really dangerous. I mean, you look at the way Pruitt's a great recruiter, and he seems like a good guy to play under as well. So, if that comes along with winning, they've got something over there.
Okay, so let's get into that. Winning. Do we actually think that either this year or maybe in 2021 after this class comes in, that Tennessee can actually jump to the next level? Because Tennessee's kind of been just the, 4th, 5th, 6th team in the East for the last, 7, 8 years longer?
Yeah, they've really underperformed too. There's always been this talk of like, oh, now is the time when Tennessee's they're gonna do this. They're gonna beat Alabama. They're gonna compete for the East, and then they just kind of don't make it, But I mean, you look at part of you kind of has that hesitation because you've seen that. But then, you look at the program they're building, and you look at I think like I go back to it. I think Jeremy Pruitt's a good coach. So I think you're going to start seeing them do some of that, upset some of these people. I mean, eventually Tennessee is going to beat Alabama. Is it going to be next year? I don't think so, but it's going to happen one year. And, Who knows? It could be sooner than later because of Pruitt. But it will happen one year, and it's not just about beating Alabama either. They've got to beat Florida. They've got to beat Georgia. They've got to go to Atlanta. I think, I don't know how many years we're away from that. Maybe I don't see it this year. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, I could see it though. I could see Tennessee, if they continue on in this path, making that push for Atlanta.
Yeah, and you look at the schedule. Tennessee's going to have a lot of chances to prove themselves as a team, but also a lot of chances to fall short early. You have at Oklahoma in week 2, then you have Florida in week 4, and then Alabama and Georgia are later in the schedule. But that's 2 rough games to start the schedule with, especially that Florida game being a conference matchup.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I'm sure Tennessee doesn't like having Alabama every year.
Mm-hmm.
When other teams don't have that team. But I mean, look, Georgia has Auburn every year. Florida has LSU. I'm pretty sure every year. So they all have tough games, and it's just if Tennessee's gonna be the team that it wants to be, it's gonna have to win those tough games. Everyone else wins those tough games, so Tennessee's gonna have to do the same thing.
The one thing that surprised me, I have no problem admitting it, how Tennessee was able to surge late last year. I mean, you had this ugly loss to Georgia State, which I think is only 8 points, but still, like, it's Georgia State. You're paying them to come there so you can blow them out. Then to lose in overtime against a BYU team that is not. This is not the BYU team that we're talking about. 10-win season, deserves a spot in a big bowl game. This was a mediocre BYU team. I mean, just wasn't a good start.
That's the kind of start that gets coaches fired. I mean, you see teams quit on coaches after those kind of starts, and I think it's really a testament to Jeremy Pruitt that he was able to rally his troops and get them to play for something, and then finish as strong as they did. Because I could really see a situation where you lose to Georgia State, then you got a whole SEC slate in front of you. You're not going into that with a lot of confidence, and so he made them believe. And they gave Alabama a tough game for a while. So they're a team that I think last year they proved that they can play with the big boys, and now it's just about putting together that from the start of the season to the end of the season, which is hard in itself.
Yeah, I mean, and Tennessee started off SEC play with a 31-point loss to Florida and a similar loss to Georgia. Not only are those the 2 teams you have to beat if you're going to remain in contention to win the East, but also 4 losses in the first 5 games, and 2 of them that ugly in SEC play. I mean, I think what Pruitt did to keep his guys focused and finish strong, I think that's just an incredible recruiting effort in itself, because at some point guys kind of questioned, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I mean, it's real. Like I said, it's really easy to fold like that. It's you're losing to your rivals too. So he kept them with something to play for, and I think there's the biggest thing this year is just can they get one of those games? I think you look at those 3 that you mentioned, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Can you win one of those? Can you really prove yourself and take one of those games?
Do you think, sort of going off that, obviously he ended strong and did a great job last year, but should Pruitt be a little concerned about his job security at this point? If he loses to Oklahoma and then loses all 3 of those games again this year, is he in trouble?
Yeah, that's where it gets tough. I mean, them having Oklahoma it's really I'd give Oklahoma the win in that one. And so if you lose all 4 of those games, and then you have 4 losses. I guess if you won all the rest of your games, what are you, 8-4? It's not terrible, but it doesn't seem like he's making that momentum we were just talking about. I think as long as he has one of those wins, right? I think he's in great shape. But I mean, if you can't prove that you can win those big games, it's going to be one of these guys that, hey, I can recruit well, I can bring these kids in, but I can't get the job done. So I would say, I said one of the 3. I think it's more important to win an SEC game than it is to win an out-of-conference game. But, even if it's one of those 4, so let's say they lose to all the SEC, the 3 big SEC teams, and they beat Oklahoma, I think that's still something you can hang your hat on and show momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think And I don't know. I think the season would have to just go even further off the rails than losing those 4 games for him to get fired in 2020. But I think if you lose all the 4 of those games, even if you win the rest, I think Pruitt's seat's kind of hot in 2021. I mean, at some point, Tennessee, they want to be competing for the East and to even you want to be in the conversation in November. And if Tennessee's going to do that, the program has to eventually, beat Florida or beat Georgia or beat Alabama to at least have an outside shot. And that's something the program hasn't had in, I don't know, years, I think, in November.
Yeah, I mean, you want a New Year's Six bowl too. I mean, you want something that that you can kind of really show, hey, Tennessee's back. Even if it's not the playoff, even if it's not the SEC championship game, you want, I mean, a 10-2 season, and even if it would be great. I mean, because that would mean that they would beat 2 of those teams. A 9-3 season means that they've beaten 1 of those teams. I think you're looking at that. That's pretty good. I think when it gets disastrous is if you lose all 4 of those and then you drop a random game to, I don't know, to South Carolina or, you know what I'm saying? And then you have 5 losses and then it just doesn't look like you've done anything, So, I mean, I think this is a real swing schedule for Tennessee, and I could see it going really well, and then if it doesn't, I could see it going bad. But this is a really important year, and kind of tying back to what we were talking about before, I think the success of the season will also play in well with its recruiting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this with the pandemic and guys, some of these guys committing without getting to see all the schools they're considering, or guys committing a little earlier than they planned just because they know, hey, I'm not going to be able to get out to these schools in June and July like I normally would. I think generally, Tony, we expect, a record number of decommitments this year. So you can imagine that if the season just did completely go off the rails, maybe Tennessee loses some guys. And if you lose some guys, then do those top prospects who committed because you had all the momentum suddenly look elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, then it can get really bad because then you're losing momentum on 2 fronts. You're not winning games, and then it's hurting your recruiting efforts. So the people are looking at your future as, is this going away too? So it's a super important year for that staff for keeping that, maintaining. It's one thing to build a class, but it doesn't mean anything until they're all signed. So maintaining that class will be big for Tennessee. And then also just, getting some wins and showing that momentum on the field. And so, I mean, like I keep on saying, it's really just a year that comes down to it can go a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we said from the top, this is a huge year for Tennessee in recruiting. If Tennessee can, sign up potentially a top 5 class, especially after a top 7 class the year before, you can imagine as those guys start to become juniors and seniors that this program can maybe get in that race for the East. So huge year for recruiting, huge year for Pruitt to kind of prove it on the field as well. And I think a lot of it comes down to that September 26th matchup with Florida.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a big one to circle. I think that, that's a rivalry game. It's a game that, could really be a statement win for where they're going with the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether you win or lose the Oklahoma game 2 weeks prior, I think you want to come out, have a big performance in that one, and just see where the season goes, and maybe Tennessee will be alive in the race for Atlanta down the stretch here.